For those of you joining us again, welcome. And for those of you who are new, welcome. So basically, if you're new here, how this goes is Dori from Recce is going to be giving a presentation and a workshop. And Dori, I don't know how you prefer to do this, but like if people have questions, like usually I have them just like kind of like write them in the chat, and then at the end you can go through the questions, and then there could be like a more of a live Q&A.
Yep, that works great.
And if you guys have attended sessions before, you need to attend 3 sessions for your certificates. And there's still, even if this is your first session, there's still plenty of time to join 3 more sessions. And then Stephen, if you wanted to give an intro about Database Tycoon, for those of you who are unfamiliar with us.
Yeah, before I turn it over to Dori to get started, I just wanted to mention that, we're running this summer camp series because we want to bring together a lot of, smart minds in the data field to talk about what they're best at. And but Database Tycoon is a data consulting agency, and we're here to help with all kinds of different problems, from technical implementations that need to be repaired, or team structuring, or anything in between. So if you work on a team that could use those types of services, or if you're thinking about expanding a data program, for example, or even if you're an engineer who wants to improve your skills, please reach out. We have a fit for you. So hope to hear from you. And with that, I'll turn it over to Dori to get us started.
Awesome. Yeah. I also just want to shout out that y'all use a bunch of open source packages, which I think is awesome, just for the resources and just the community. Okay, so perfect. Screen is up. So I'm Dori Wilson, and as I had that nice intro, I'll be leading kind of a DBT 101 session, as well as how you can elevate your data testing and validations using Recce, where I am the head of data. Quick about me. I have an economics degree from UCSB. I have 9 years experience across a variety of companies, which has given me a lot of insight into how different size companies, different structures, and different teams deal with, understand, communicate, and test their data. Started off at the SF Fed. That's how I got to San Francisco before realizing academia doesn't necessarily pay well. Don't know if I want to devote my career to screaming into the void with research. And so transitioned to tech, where I got my first job as a data scientist at Uber, working on safety products, and then got in the startup land from there. I've been the first product analytics hire at 2 different companies where I've worked on building their analytics from the ground up, which is really exciting. So part of the talk that I'm giving today is coming from my own insights there, just like practical tips that I've kind of learned on the job. And then I'm also a YC Winter 24 alum. And for those not in deep tech circles, that just means I got to an accelerator last year and was a founder. Before deciding to join Recce. Now, who's this session for? This is going to be obviously for DBT practitioners. Anyone who wants to extend beyond just like the existing testing, understand how to do schema validation, so kind of basic stuff, and then getting into Recce, which is more complex. Career changers, so people that are maybe being a little more self-taught, working on getting that certificate to put on the LinkedIn profile and share on the resume. And then teams with lots of stakeholders. I think that's something that is where you really need that data validation, because it's no longer just like, oh, it's, dozens of tables. I can just keep it in my head. It's maybe 10 stakeholders. When you start having a lot more stakeholders, teammates, or what most DBT repos turn into, which is spiraling models, it becomes a lot more important that you're validating this data. So why do you care about it? Besides when you have a lot of stakeholders, right? Data is all about trust. Like that's the bread and butter of what we do. And when we push bad data, you break that trust. When you break that trust, people don't look at your team. They don't trust your team. They don't trust the team. They don't trust you. And then you get fired. Honestly, like if you don't have this, no one's going to listen to what you have to say. They're not going to trust your dashboards, and they're going to either start querying themselves or going into Google Sheets, which then you lose all types of data contracts and you have no idea who's accessing what. You lose that source of truth. So getting these data validations and testings are really critical for you keeping and maintaining that trust. Now, a typical problem. call it the silent data bug problem. So you as an analytics engineer, data engineer, will get a request to add a filter to definition. Something simple like this one, where it's like, oh, I'll just change. I only want to look at where orders are completed, right? We're using the Jaffle Shop example where it's like, okay, I have all these products. My PM said, we don't need to know what wasn't fulfilled or returned. Like, we just want to focus on completed, right? Very simple. You update the code, your CI passes, your DBT test pass. Awesome, celebrate, push to prod, move on with your life. But then all of a sudden, a few days later, you get a Slack from the CFO, of course, in the public channel, asking why revenue suddenly dropped. Then this is when you panic a little bit, and then realize that your filter that you added, this very innocent change here, actually impacted a revenue model, right? So this is something that even though your DBT test passed, your schema looks good, nothing has really been broken, so to speak, from there, the context of the data that you changed really mattered. You didn't fully understand those downstream dependencies and that business context that you were adjusting, not just for like this model and this team, but for other teams that were depending on that type of data. Others examples of this that I've gotten, I think most comments probably dashboards don't line up, and you'll have people asking, like in finance, like, why doesn't this number line up with the product, right? Think about like active orgs or the number of people using a certain feature, right? This is where you start seeing, oh, the dependencies of like, this dashboard relies on this table, this one relies on this table, I only updated here, but not there, really starts to play out. You also will see like model refactors where you'll accidentally modify a critical column. You'll be going in to clean something up, especially if you're high compute, trying to make a model more efficient, right? Maybe change a left join to an air join, or maybe you'll just drop unnecessary columns. You're like, this seems deprecated definition, I don't need this. But then all of a sudden downstream, that was like critical to some calculation or played into something else. And it's hard to know that. And you don't need to know everything off the top of your head. That's why you have these tests, and that's why you do data validations, right? So I think about this as like, you don't know the unknown unknowns, right? There are like known unknowns where it's like, okay, I know I need to check this. I know this is going to be unknown, but we'll see how it is. And then it's the unknown unknowns of things you don't necessarily think to check because you don't have in your head the full understanding of the interdependencies of your models. So into kind of starting the meat of it, the basic DBT test. There are 4 of them. You have first one, not null. These are the ones that you'll most commonly use. These are all at the column level, metric level. So not null, obviously, it will help you catch bad joins, missing data. This is making sure that, no value, no row in this column can contain a null, right? This is really good. And like going back to the joins of like, if I'm doing a left join, I'm joining something, there's missing data in that join, it will help me catch that, right? You typically use this for primary keys, required fields, things that if there's a null in that row for any reason, it's busted, right? Second most common is definitely unique. This one is just as it sounds. It's making sure that for our column, every single row has a unique value, right? And this is really good at catching duplicate records. Maybe you did a union all incorrectly. Maybe there's something else. It could be a join. It could be, really a bunch of things. Sometimes you'll catch source data that's messed up that way. It also will catch if the primary key is busted, right? Again, primary key is not null unique. You should probably have that on every single primary key in your models. Also natural keys. Accepted values. So this is really great for especially categorical variables, and especially when you're getting the data from a source and you're not necessarily just writing yourself in a case when, right? So when we think about, and we'll go through this, right? Orders will have like status, will be like fulfilled, returned, completed. And so you'll want to make sure for that metric that, only one of these values is accepted for this, right? So if it will fail if there's anything that's not explicitly defined that you put in the test. Again, used for status category, like categorical variable status fields. The last one is relationships. So this one is where you'll be able to define, hey, like this user ID, make sure it also relates to this user ID, right? You don't want to have, let's see, typically like you'll have like your dim user table, right? And then you'll be working in a different table, maybe it's the metrics space, and you want to say, hey, I want to make sure all the user IDs in my metrics table also are in my dim users table, right? Because you don't want to have outside of your dim users, which would be like your source of truth for all users, some type of new user pop up, right? So it helps you catch broken foreign keys, bad joins. Where you should use this is on join columns or things that should be the same between the models. I found relationships is very helpful at especially that dashboard problem that I talked about earlier, where you might have different people seeing different things on dashboards. This is where this one becomes really useful at solving. Just an example of these tests. So in this model orders, you have order ID as the primary key. You see here, unique, not null, easy test. The next one is status, it's categorical, right? You have your accepted values, placed, shipped, completed, returned. And then you have your customer ID, where this should be related to your customers table here, right? In the sense that everything in the customer ID needs to also exist in the customer table. If any one of these tests fail, it will pop up when you do DBT test and require you to go check. So those are column level. This is the most common model level test you see. So when you're putting this in your YAML and your schema, and I'll show you in a moment or a little bit later, this exists before you start defining all of your columns. It's a unique combination of columns. It duplicates, it catches duplicates across contextual information, bad joins, source data issues. You can see in this example right here. So this is, revenue by product by month, right? So each product should only have one row per month. So, but it's not necessarily a primary key that you care about here. It's just making sure that the data is accurate, the schema is structured as you would expect. So this we put as a model level check. It's great for like these type of tables where you need the combinations of columns to be unique. If it's a composite key, I think it's very valuable. Now, even more fun stuff. Those are the basics. Some more complex testing. So in DBT, it allows you to write some custom SQL tests. This means you can have actual business logic incorporated into your testing. You don't have to rely on just the preset that is in the DBT utils package. That's where those 5 tests we just talked about are coming from. You can do it. There's 2 different ways to really do it. You can create a macro, which allows you to kind of make a variable of a test if you wanted to ensure, oh, these are always going to be paused values, or these are going to need to be between these extremes, or I need this to be this metric to be a function of this other metric that you can put in SQL. You can put that in the macro, so you can reuse across different tables by just saying, this column, this column, this column, or you can write just a straight SQL file and put it in your test folder, right? So you don't have to worry about trying to write a macro if you don't want to deal with that type of YAML. Also, Recce, obviously plug, and one of the things we'll get to is we can do custom queries as well. And just something to know, if you ever look at the DBT utils package, under the hood, it is just essentially doing these type of tests that it's just written. You're just allowed to call them, right? So instead of having to just do DBT utils for macros, you can also write macros in the same way. So if you want some templates to do that, I recommend looking at that repo. Now, there's another type of test, unit test. This is for when you have a bunch of data and you want to check that business logic. But unlike here, which will run on your actual data to get an answer, maybe you don't have the compute. Maybe it's just really inefficient, right? Maybe you just don't need to check over across production schema. So this will not run on your actual data. You will create a very small fake data set. Like you define the data set, just where it's like, this will be my inputs, and you'll tell in the test, and we'll show in a moment, expected outputs. You'll use this when you have complex logic that you just need to make sure works. And if it works for the small data set, you can extrapolate that will also work for the production data set. So these are example cases when you might want to use it. What do I mean by this? Is just a SQL, just a model. It has this hideous logic for people trying to make sure that you have a valid email address, right? It's just nasty regex. Don't worry about understanding it, right? But it's just to show you this is an example of like complex logic. So for this, you'd want to do, you can do a unit test. Let's assume this table is massive. You don't want to run over production every time you run and update your model and your pipeline. So this unit test is just checking the logic. You're inputting this data right here. You've given it some good emails of like, let example, cool at unknown, right? bad Gmail. Notice it's missing the @ sign, right? Missing dot at gmail.com. See, it's missing the dot. So these are things where you can help like be like, oh, I want to make sure these get caught as bad things, which is then what you're doing down here. Like, this is valid. This is valid. Bad Gmail is not valid. Missing data is not valid. There's no logic in here, right? We're just saying for this test to run it on this, go through the SQL, do this ugly mess here, and then make sure this is still true, that we are getting this output, that we're getting, these true and falses. Now, instead of doing that, in general, like what are DBT tests doing? The ones that we've covered, they're checking, is my code right? But they're not good at getting, is my data right? Like even these type of unit tests, right? So they're really good at catching schema violations, constraint failures, like calculation mistakes, right? And known edge cases when you can code something in there and you fully understand what a limitation might be. But what they're missing, again, is like this context and meaning, right? Like getting at, is my data correct, right? The whole point of us coding is really for the data. It's not for the code itself. So it can miss the business impact changes. Going back to our first example about I added this simple filter, but it impacted a revenue model, right? Silent data shifts, right? Where maybe the source data is wrong, but everything is still passing and going through test as normal, but it doesn't actually look right if you started peeking at it. Downstream ripple effects, right? All these interdependencies that you might have, or unexpected data patterns, things that just pop up normally in just our lives as data people. So Recce comes in here. We make it easy to validate your data for business context and meaning. So instead of having to worry about writing all these unit tests, instead about having to worry about custom SQL, you can use us. You can also use those as well. This is our open source package to do this heavy lifting for you. So before I get into it, there's terms I'm going to use, and I just want to make sure we're on the same page about it. DBT artifacts. So these are a collection of JSON files that have metadata about the DBT run, structure, config, and execution details. These get compiled anytime you do like a DBT build or a DBT docs generate, which you'll see me do every single time for our demo. This is important because this is what Recce is doing under the hood, is comparing your production to your development, those artifacts in that way. That's our secret sauce. An environment, what do I mean by environment here, just to be clear, is like your different schemas or databases where your models live. So like your development, your staging, your production. So what we'll be doing again is like comparing your production environment, DBT artifacts, to your developing or your staging like DBT artifacts. Depends on how you set it up in your profile when you do local development. So to get started, I have the QR code here that goes to our 5-minute setup, but you can, pip install Recce. It's very simple. We have Recce debug as the command for troubleshooting if you have issues getting worked up. For this demo, I've already pre-installed Recce. I've already gotten our DBT production artifacts up. The 3 different cases scenarios we'll go through today is the first one. Like I said in the data, that silent bug issue is just adding a filter to the model. We've improved one metric, but we've messed up a few others. Our second example will be changing a column from dollars to cents. We didn't realize how much that would impact downstream. And then our third one will be fixing a poorly calculated metric to a better one, and just seeing what changes need to be communicated and where we should be checking once we do that update. And as I said, I've already installed Recce, and our target base state files, which is just the production DBT artifacts, are already pre-installed for our demos today. The workflow I will generally do for these demos. First, obviously, the code change will occur. Then I'll run, DBT tests to check structure, and then I'll run Recce server to check the business impact. And that's when we'll go into Recce and do some fun stuff, where we'll be like adding some critical diffs, validations to checklist. Diffs meaning we'll just be comparing production environment, the differences between the two, you'll see in a moment. And then how you can share findings with stakeholders and then deploy with confidence is the general workflow. So to the live demo, let's make sure my screen is following us. It is not, so let me share my screen again. Okay, perfect. So I am using a cursor. I love it. Highly recommend if you're not using like an AI-enabled IDE to use it, but you should know it's not great at debugging. So don't fully rely on it, or you'll get stuck in a weird debugging cycle where it won't actually find your issue. So these are the steps that I've already pre-done prior to like showing you the demo today. I've set up my virtual environment, I've installed Recce, I've compiled for my production artifacts, I've saved them in a folder I call target base, which is here. You can see it's just a bunch of like JSON files per models and everything. You don't have to worry about that. Again, this is just under the hood with Recce, helping you understand like what we were doing. So let me check our branch that we're on. Perfect, we're in the demo branch. So for this one, and I'll show it again to you, what we have done is here in staging orders, we've added this little filter where static equals complete. We've had, in this example, a PM come and say, hey, why are we looking at returned? Why are we looking at incomplete? Like I only want to understand and care about orders that are completed. So we add this filter here. Side note for the newbies, never actually put a filter in like a staging file like this. I'm just doing this for the demo because it's much simpler, but it's bad practice to do anything like this in a staging layer. Save that for an intermediate table or a downstream table. Just have to call that out. So we'll do our DBT depths, our DBT seed, our DBT run. Everything's passing, looking good. And then we'll do our DBT test. And so you'll see in this example, everything is passing, nothing's null, our values are accepted in our downstream tables, right? Unique, everything looks good here, right? Like we haven't messed anything up. But the issue is there's actually things we have messed up, which is when you do Recce server, and then we'll go to local, which I believe I'm gonna need to stop sharing my screen again to like switch back. It's not following me. Here we go. Perfect. Okay. So here is Recce. So this is just localhost. This is what pops up once you run Recce server. You can see here, this is the table that we've modified. I've clicked on it and then I can see explicitly what has changed, right? Again, I've added this filter where status equals completed. So one thing I want to do here is I hit impact radius. It tells me what downstream tables can be impacted, as well as defines for me what the type of change it is. So this is a breaking change because we've impacted a whole model, which means potentially all of these tables downstream have been infected or impacted because this model itself entirely has changed. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start here. I see, ooh, this is like something different. I can do a profile diff. So what this profile diff does is just do a bunch of basic stat tests comparing our base, which is going to be the production environment in our case, to the current. So we can see the customer lifetime value has pretty significantly decreased once I have like filtered out incomplete orders, returned orders, and I'm only focusing on status. Now, this is something that the PM wanted, right? We wanted to only focus on these to get it. We only wanted to focus on people that have completed, right? Because if people aren't, they're returning things, it's probably not a good value for us, right? We're not getting the real thing. You see this with the medium. Great. Now, this is where you start seeing here, our count distinct has gone down. So we're getting fewer distinct values. One of the other things you can see here, because I've selected this column, is I can also see what other things this column is feeding into, right? They can see this column level lineage. So we'll do, query. So this is another way to think about this. This is looking at individual columns. We can also run the whole query. We see our data. Great, but maybe I want to understand at a row level, right? I know overall the metrics have changed as I wanted to, right? We've filtered out orders from like value that aren't actually valuable to the company. So now I want to just check row by level, right? Just get an eyeball on this. Now this is where I can see, we have a bunch of nulls, right? Like Sean in, what has happened? Our current, which is like the development environment we're in, has a bunch of nulls where he has placed orders previously, right? Same with number of orders, like that is now null. Now there's a couple of things I would want to do from here. Is I'd want to go back to my stakeholder and ask, hey, with this change, we did in fact get a more like accurate value of customer lifetime, something that you wanted. But we've also introduced a bunch of nulls. Do we want first order to only be for completed orders? If so, how do we want to address these nulls? Or do we want to create new variables? So we have like first completed order date or first order overall, right? These are things that come with business context that you'll want to address. You don't accidentally screw up a bunch of stuff. You could also have downstream stakeholders that are using these calculations for something else with other filters, right? So this allows you to capture that in real time. Awesome. So we have found this. If I want to share this explicitly with my PM, I can copy the clipboard, put in Slack. Though if I'm going to share with my PM, I would probably do the profile diff instead, just because that would allow me to give them how much is actually changing, as well as then like, what do I mean by how much? Like, here's explicitly what it is. So we will switch back to cursor now. Perfect. Okay, so we're back here. I'm going to get out of my environment, Control C. I'm going to switch my branch. This is going to be a new development branch. It has totally different changes, right? This change, it's going to be in our payments. We're going to be changing the amount. It used to be divided by 100 because amount naturally comes in as cents. I, as an engineer going through, was like, oh, why do we have this manipulation and staging? This seems like unnecessary. So I've gone through and deleted it, right? So we're on our branch now. So I'm going to do the same thing I did. Just do whole thing, dbt depth, dbt seed, dbt run. You can also do dbt build if you wanted to. Great, all my tables run. I'm doing dbt test. Great, everything works. And then just to make sure my docs compiled, dbt docs generate, because that will explicitly make sure I'm doing my artifacts. It also is if you're working in a large code base and you don't want to rerun everything every time. Maybe you have more than just like 7 models here. You can also do just dbt docs generate, which will generate that whole catalog without having to every single time compile tables. So we have that. That is done. You can again see, even though we've adjusted this, all of our tests are passing. There's nothing wrong that those have caught. And then we'll go into Recce server now. Perfect. And we'll switch screens again. I'm going to restart. Perfect. This error not found because it hasn't yet adjusted for where we are. To refresh. Perfect. Okay. So here you can see originally we had changed the staging orders file. Now we're changing the staging payments. I only have Recce showing me the models that have been impacted, but I can also have it show me all models, all lineage, right? But these haven't been adjusted, so that's why they're grayed out. So we're just focusing on our change models here. Again, I recommend just impact radius. Shows up everything I need to know. In this case, because we impacted just a single column, it didn't impact the whole model. We're calling that partial breaking. And that's why impact radius also popped up all of these individual columns. So these are columns that are derived, right? That means they use this column amount in their calculation, right? Pass through means we're just kind of passing through from this previous one, customer lifetime value, to here, but it's still reliant on amount. Awesome. So now that I know exactly the columns I want to focus on, I don't need to go through the whole model. I can just look at each individual column. So customer lifetime value, I can do, again, the profile diff, look at the stats, right? I see, okay, a little bit weird, bunch of nulls going to huge int, maybe a little bit more of like, curious what's going on. So I'll do a top K diff. This is just looking at kind of categories, how things have changed. I can see in my current base, right? So base is going to be the production environment again. Current is my development environment, that there are no more any of these values, right, for my base. And now we have a bunch of others, right? It has completely shifted this distribution. Just again, just to make sure that we're on the same page about what code has changed, I'll go back to amount, and you can always look at the code here. So again, explicitly, I've taken amount, which was divided by 100, and just changed it back to amount. Right, and it was divided by 100 because amount comes in a cents, which we're seeing here of like, okay, we're having a lot larger values now because we're no longer dividing by 100. Other columns that's impacted, we can go in and check. gift card amount, we can look at this. We can see a histogram diff, see all these values have changed. Again, you can see this has gotten much larger across the board. We could also go back and do the query diff again. So we can also just focus on just querying the impacted column. So this runs the query, which just straight up runs what this is. Under the hood, when we do run diff, it's comparing our development environment, current, to the production environment base. And we also tell you the last time that that artifact, that production environment was run, which was last night for me as I was prepping for this demo, where we just ran this one 3 minutes ago. You watched me do that. So we did the query diff. We see here, okay, these different orders, the credit card amount went from 10 to 1,000, right? So $10 is now 1,000 cents. The amount was $10, 1,000 cents. And you can see how that impacts like bank transfers and coupon amounts. So we have, in a business context way, dramatically impacted a bunch of these columns that we didn't think necessarily would be impacted by just changing the amount. So fixes that we'd want to do here is either put back in that divided by 100 or go through somewhere else. Ideally, there'd be an int table here that would do some cleaning, right? Just, again, making sure we have our business logic caught in the line before we push something like this to code. Because if everything all of a sudden jumped up by a factor of 100, there'd be a lot of questions from a lot of people, especially anything that relates to revenue. Awesome. So for our last example for today, our last demo, this one is going to be a little bit more complex. So these were a little simpler ones. This one is looking at, I'm actually fixing a metric. So I will switch. Here we go. Full screen. So this one I already have just set up for us. You won't have to watch me switch branches again. And what we have done is in staging payments, I'll show you the code. Click here, go to the code, is we're back to this amount column, but we're no longer, getting rid of the 100. We're actually calculating, okay, what is the coupon amount, right? For this, in the Jaffa Shop example, we are incentivizing customers by giving them coupons, right? So they're not actually paying the full order amount. They're paying the order amount minus the coupon, right? So we want to make sure when we're calculating how much revenue we're actually getting, the actual customer lifetime value, which means how much we expect a customer to give us over time, that we are getting rid of the discounts that we are giving them, right? To give us a more accurate measure. So we're doing that. We're also adding, you see this green table, we've also added a new finance revenue table. So this one is entirely new, which is why it's green. Recce can also show you these different types of things. We've added a bunch of revenue related things about gross revenue, net revenue, all these fun things that we should be tracking and we want to put into a dashboard. So going back here, you can also see, okay, these other tables we've also modified, right? So customers, again, this isn't just anymore, I make one change and it's all going down. I've made a few different changes in tables and added a net new table. So in this one, I'm calculating the net amount, again, taking away the money we're taking in minus the discount we're giving them to get net amount, right? And we're doing some cleaning up, excluding incomplete payments, negative payments, not doing a mass filter, doing it for this individual like CTE, this subquery. The final thing that we're changing is in our customer segments, where now that we have the new net customer lifetime value, right, which is actually taking account the discounts, we're changing this value segment for what is high, medium, and low to be off of that, not just off the customer lifetime value, right? So these are pretty much across the board improvements that I'm doing so I can have more accurate metrics. Now, let's validate these, right? A lot of things have changed. So we'll click impact radius. We'll see, okay, we have one. We've added a new table. This is a non-breaking change, right? We're just doing an addition. You can see, okay, feeding to here, adding a table, but we also see it feeds into, okay, we've modified this customer lifetime value, right? So we can go in, check the columns, see how this is changing, how are we impacting it, right? See, okay, we're changing the number of distinct counts, the max mins are changing, the median's changing. Maybe I want to take a peek at the histogram diff. I love a histogram. You can tell I'm an economics background. To see how this is shifting, right? And we are changing the distribution, But because we have the business context, we know this is an improved distribution, right? Even though it's decreasing, that is the point of the changes that we're making. So we can also add this to our checklist, which I'll get through what the checklist can do. So in this example, we know we have different model schemas we want to check, right? We want to do these tests. I, as a somebody who's either reviewing this or me for myself, can create things that I want to make sure I'm doing row counts, right? I want to make sure I'm looking at the value diffs at the customer table. These are things that I can do here. And then as I look at them and validate, okay, yes, this looks correct, I can mark as approved, right? So it's a way of consolidating that I am doing all the data validations that I want. And just as another check on myself to make sure I'm catching unknown unknowns, right? Or if a teammate was doing all of these changes, we'll close this. I can then, it makes it easier for me to go through as a reviewer. So I don't have to try and read their code to guess what changed. I can just go through the checklist and see things here. Yeah. So that is Recce in a nutshell with 3 different ways of doing it. So I'm going to go back, finish up our presentation, and then we'll get to questions. Perfect. Okay. So that was a lot we covered in live demo. Just some tips and tricks for Recce. Recce debug is your friend. It's great for troubleshooting your setup. As you saw, I used impact radius before diving into details. It's a great way of making sure you only focus on what matters and that you can see, oh, these columns are impacted, this whole model's impacted. It's a nice shorthand, so you don't have to think it through entirely yourself, right? You can catch those dependencies. Focus your diffs, which is, again, you saw what I was doing. Those were the tests of comparing our base to current on business critical models only. These are things that become, again, a lot more important as you scale and you have to worry about compute. I've had sometimes your queries, and I think in your career, if you haven't had this already, you will take 30 plus minutes to run, just because the data set it's running on is massive, right? It's hard to make that table more efficient. Query diff for custom business validation, that was the test you saw where I was comparing the values, and I could also see row by row, seeing what's changing. I didn't have to just rely on my max, my medians, my histograms. I can put it into hard terms of just checking that. And then we also think about that as spot checking. We just make it a little bit simpler, and you can compare your production to your development in one place. Share your record results and PR comments. Oh, that was one thing I didn't do that I do want to show you. That is important. Let me make sure I'm getting, here we go. So that last example I showed you, which had a whole bunch of changes, we're adding new stuff, we're changing derived columns. This is the PR that we're doing that for. Let me get to here we go. This is PR. This is my teammate that wrote up all of that. She did all these changes. She's posted what the lineage looks like. And then because we can also integrate Recce into the CI layer, and this is what I'm talking about by pasting into the PR, we can have the lineage graph. We can look at, here's all those checklists, right? That last tab I showed you where you can go through and validate and see those checks. It'll become part of your PR. So I don't necessarily even have to open up Recce. I can just go to this PR and then click through to see what is changing. This, we didn't copy paste. We integrate this in CI, which then makes this all automatic, which is really nice. You don't even have to manually do any work there. Switching back to our deck. Okay, so we covered Recce tips and tricks. General testing advice. This is just hard one from the field. Don't ever do a select star. It makes it really difficult to read, debug, and contributes to schema shifts. If you've ever gone through and gone to the end of a very long SQL file and you just see select star, you don't actually know what columns are being included. So please do this for yourself and for others on your team. Value diff your key metrics. So that was us going through looking at the profiles. That was us looking at the query diffs. Anytime that there's a major metric that your execs care about, it's just a good idea to look at it to make sure it isn't changing in ways that don't make sense. Or if it is changing, you know what to communicate to whom. Primary and keys should all have unique and not null tests. And then again, I mentioned this earlier, the unique combination of columns will catch a surprising amount of issues. It's just really useful, and definitely do it. And kind of our final plug here is like Recce will help make these and other rules automatic and part of your whole team's process. Because again, you can put that checklist into your CI, you can share that with others, and you can just have a more formal structure of looking at data validations. Yeah, so thank y'all very much for hanging in there with me. I hope you enjoyed. I saw there were questions in chat and we'll get into them. So just going to go in the questions. We have a community Discord. This is our website. There's my LinkedIn. Feel free to connect. If you can tell, but I love people. I love talking with people. Feel free to send me an email. I love chatting about this or other data problems. It's something near and dear to my heart. All right, now I will look at chat and we'll start with the top questions. Okay. Going through. Oh, we got one. And then we can just do shout questions. Is DBT run necessary before you check Recce? So for me in these demos, absolutely, because I'm switching branches. And so I need to make sure that my development data is catching up. When you're in a normal development environment, DBT docs generate will suffice. But if you do want to do some of these diffs, yes, you'll need to do DBT run, but you won't necessarily need to do it as often as I'm doing. Yeah. Any other questions about Recce or just general questions about testing in general or anything else? Happy to chat.
I do have one other question if nobody else has one. First of all, thank you, Dori, for that presentation. That was excellent. And it makes me really wonder how many changing data values I've let slip through in PRs over the years, and how a tool like this could really come in handy. One question I had is, you kind of alluded to this towards the end with the CI/CD mention and the PR that you showed, but where do you see Recce fitting into a data team stack? Like, is this something that you automate and leave in CI, or do you find yourself in the dashboard looking at diffs often? Like,
yeah, no, what a great question. I wrote a blog post about this recently. So I think when you do simple PRs of like, I'm just adding a table or adding a column, Recce is going to be overkill. Just actually pulling it up and looking at it, honestly, it's just going to be a lot more time when it's like, oh, I know this isn't going to break anything, so I'm just adding anything. But when you're doing like that last demo we showed where it's a little more complex, that's where you should be doing Recce for sure, manually doing that exploration. When it comes to the workflow and the CI/CD layer, I would say I want ideally part of every workflow that you're doing. So I want to separate out me going through manually and exploring versus like, I have the CI/CD. These are my basic checks that are running through every time, especially for maybe I think I'm just doing a simple push, like not changing much, like maybe adding that filter. And then I impacted a bunch of stuff. So having that checklist where I can be like, okay, here are my key metrics, make sure that these business contexts are fit every single time, and incorporate this into that. Again, not just the medians, the averages, or max mins will help you catch a lot of things automatically that you would normally ignore. Like in my own personal experiences when I did data validation, which is what Recce cares about, I didn't do it as much because I just didn't have a lot of time and I had a lot of stakeholders and a lot of things I needed to do. So we have a lot of, in a bunch of my old jobs, graveyards of notebooks that were trying to do what Recce was doing, but really manually of comparing staging to production that no one ever used. And so this just makes it a lot simpler. Instead of having to manually try and upkeep that, I just have one place to go. And once I put in the CI/CD, can just automatically do it for me. It's not necessarily monitoring. Again, you can do those more custom SQL checks as well. And then make unit test easy because you can just add a check versus having to write that nasty, ugly little macro that we saw.
Right. Yeah. Makes sense. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone else have any questions? Oh, actually, I have one more question. When you were showing the UI in the demo, you mentioned that, or I saw there was a button that said connect to Recce Cloud. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah. Okay. So the open source project, completely free. Our cloud, we also have a free tier. The difference between cloud and our OSS project is that's a lot of local environment. Our cloud allows you to, we will host it for you. We're SOC 2 certified, but more importantly, enables sharing. So before you'd have to like copy and paste these things into your PR. This enables you to bring in that stakeholders. Like when I was talking about that PM where I need to go back through and discuss, hey, I've changed this metric. It's changing things the way we want, but it is also impacting all these other things. I can share with them a link that they can easily access and explore Recce themselves. So we'll take them to the Recce UI that you saw, versus them having to run Recce server and set up a local environment. It just makes it a lot more collaborative when it comes to sharing what's changing and doing data validation. More realistically, one of the things we see this for is for teams with a lot of stakeholders. And if you've worked a lot with people that are like on the business side of the house, especially as a data person, they're not going to give you the time of day because they don't understand how this matters to them. So anything you can do to decrease the friction of making this is how it matters to you, or hey, please just look at this, give me like 1 minute, is going to help you actually get that collaboration that you want and the answers that you need from them before you push to prod and then they come back to you later saying, you broke this, why is this wrong? Yeah.
Gotcha. Sounds good. Thanks.
Yeah.
All right, cool. Well, thank you guys all for attending. Dori, this was excellent. Thank you so much. So if you caught Dori's QR codes to keep in touch with her, when we have the meeting recording, I will be posted to YouTube. So I'll send it to everybody here to circle back to. And thank you guys so much. And stay tuned for next week where we will be diving into data orchestration. All right. Have a great rest of your day, everybody. Goodbye.
Thank y'all. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.